Hello YouTube, this is Johnny with your weekly aphorism. This week's aphorism comes to us from none other than Galileo Galilei, the 16th, 17th century Italian polymath and scientist. Here's how it goes. By denying scientific principles, one may maintain any paradox. That is, without a foundation that cuts the fat away from the meat, there's no way to know what you're talking about. If everything is permitted in truth, then nothing is permitted as truth. That's the first paradox. The soil from which all manner of irrational abominations must grow. So what are some scientific principles? Well, for one thing, induction. We have to, at least on some level, admit the use of our senses for understanding the world around us. That doesn't mean that we trust our senses blindly or naively. To the contrary. Part of the point of scientific reasoning is to find truths which are counterintuitive or involve things which are hard to see because they're microscopic, or very large, like galaxies, heavenly bodies, and so on. But we have to be able to, at least on some level, trust our senses and our ability to perceive what's going on in the world. Another scientific principle is Occam's razor, which is expressed very well by Einstein when he said things should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. Anyway, the point of this isn't to do a whole crash course on scientific method or the philosophical underpinnings of it, though I may do that one day in the future, so much as it is to point out paradoxes that are created by ignoring matters of intellectual or scientific principle. Most things that appear paradoxical only do so because you're missing some important element or perspective that would reveal the trick. Think about how all magic tricks seem to have a paradoxical idea undergirding them. Otherwise, they wouldn't appear to be so amazing. Like, wow, he sawed them in half. That's not possible. Amazing. We find illusions amazing because they break our expectations as to how the world works. And another principle is that the world works consistently, or to put it another way, like phenomena goes with like phenomena. We're able to test things because we can find consistency, and if there's an aberration in that consistency, we can see what changed, and hopefully, with care and testing, we can arrive at a reasonable conclusion about what's going on or why it changed. When you understand that what you see isn't necessarily what is so, it becomes much harder to be fooled by various tricks. Like, imagine if we didn't live in a consistent world. Then nothing about any magician's trick would be amazing to us. There wouldn't be a job for them because anything they did would make sense to us since nothing would be impossible, see? An example of this denial of scientific principles would be Zeno's paradoxes, many of which center on a somewhat peculiar idea. The most basic related idea is that for an object to move from point A to point Z, the object has to get to halfway between the 2 points, and then halfway between those 2 points, and then so on and so on. So nothing ever really moves. All movement is an illusion. I think this is an example of purely rationalistic reasoning that's disconnected from the real world of our experience. So it doesn't really explain anything. It's just more of an interesting mathematics puzzle more than anything. So I know some people probably think it exposes some profound truths about metaphysics, but I disagree, since I agree with the use of scientific principles in my investigation of the world, and the ideas put forth by Zeno there are radically opposed to all experience of things, to the point where even if he was right, it would have little practical relevance whatsoever, and would explain little that really interests us as human beings. But of course he isn't right, because he's denying scientific principles, specifically induction, and maintaining the absurd paradox that nothing moves, while relying on observations about things moving without admitting the obvious observation of things in fact getting from point to point anyway. So you can make all the conceptually appealing rationalistic castles in the sky you want to, but that's all they'll ever be if they're not relevant to the actual living, breathing world. That's just one really tame example. I could cover many, many more. In fact, maybe one day I'll do an entire series on little paradoxes like these. When I've got a little more time, I might do that. But anyways, the source of all kinds of pseudoscientific and nonsense ideas that propagate throughout the world. But try to remember that by denying scientific principles, one may maintain any paradox. And maybe you could remind yourself, catch yourself when you're being irrational or defending things that just don't make sense. And ask yourself, am I denying basic principles of thought and science in order to make myself feel better about what I believe? If so, cut it out. It helps no one and just muddies the water further. Anyway, here's a relevant quote by Einstein to go out on. He says, "But before mankind could be ripe for a science which takes in the whole of reality, a second fundamental truth was needed, which only became common property among philosophers with the advent of Kepler and Galileo. Pure logical thinking cannot yield us any knowledge of the empirical world. All knowledge of reality starts from experience and ends in it. Propositions arrived at by purely logical means are completely empty as regards reality. Because Galileo saw this, and particularly because he drummed it into the scientific world, he is the father of modern physics, indeed of modern science altogether. That comes from Ideas and Opinions. Anyway, keep your wits about you. Peace.